Hello, and welcome back to My Therapist's a Witch. My name is Elizabeth, and I am very happy to be here with you all. Before we begin, I thought we could just take a few moments to let our body fully arrive in this moment. So if it feels safe, and if you're in a comfortable place, please feel free to either sit or stand in a comfortable position. And you can either take a soft focus or close your eyes, whatever feels safer for you. And just start to move your awareness to noticing that gentle pull of gravity on your whole body. Seeing if you can really surrender to that sensation. So letting the shoulders drop away from the ears, letting your tongue rest at the bottom of your mouth, perhaps even relaxing your jaw just a little bit. And consciously letting go of any tension that is lifting you up and off the earth. How can you take that upward energy and give it back to gravity? Taking time in this moment to notice how your body has weight and your body breathes. And taking time to notice how you feel now compared to before we started. So allowing more of the language of the body to come forward, which is simply sensation, feeling, awareness. Thank you for doing that practice with me. So I realized that it's been a minute since I had a conversation with y'all about PMDD and complex PTSD. So for some of you, if this is your first time sitting with me, hi, I'm Elizabeth. I am a somatic therapist. I'm pre-licensure, so I'm in my associateship, but I'm very lucky that I get to be working now. And I have premenstrual dysphoric disorder, also known as PMDD. I have complex post-traumatic stress disorder, CPTSD, and I also have ADHD. So I'm a bit of the alphabet soup here, but I have come to a part of my healing journey where I feel like I'm no longer being overtaken by my symptoms or that my body is being hijacked and driven by my diagnoses. For me in my journey, I found that integrating a more holistic lens, so including spirituality and psychology together, were really the secret sauce that helped me gain my own sovereignty with disorders that I have, frankly, no control over, that I cannot help that I have them. So I thought today we could just zoom a little bit within kind of the Venn diagram of PMDD and trauma and how I've experienced it and what I'm starting to notice the more that I share space with other folks who have PMDD. So just a very brief explanation. Premenstrual dysphoric disorder is commonly described as extreme PMS, but it's not just extreme PMS. It is a debilitating and often life-threatening disorder because of the high suicidality that accompanies it. I, within my own journey, have had to learn how to be with my own suicidality and experience with that. And I've also had to learn how to communicate what PMDD feels like, because often when there's a disorder that is a part of a female cycle or a woman's cycle, it's diminished. It's not viewed as severe or as bad as it actually is. And that's because of the patriarchy and male dominant lens that often requires us to perform at the same level as a man does who doesn't have a cycle. And that's just me speaking my truth there. But it's really important that if you're listening, you really understand that this is not just, oh, I cramp really bad or I get kind of depressed. No, it is as if I am a totally different person during that week. And for folks who also have PMDD, these symptoms are extreme, they're severe, and they're often debilitating. So I've had PMDD since I basically started my period. I started my period when I was around 14, and I remember the distinct shift in my personality when my period hit. And over the years, I became more and more aware of this pattern where once my period started, I had this experience of feeling like myself. And then, there would be kind of this upward trajectory where I would be feeling good. I'm like, okay, I got life. Here we are. I'm myself. Great. And then the week before my period, it was like I was being possessed by this demon that ruined my life, ruined my relationships, ruined all the progress that I seemed to have been able to make outside of that week. I suffered with this by myself and alone for years. And when I was younger, there was nobody talking about this. There was hardly any information on it. And when I would go to doctors or tell them this is what I have, it was just sort of like, oh yeah, it's what you got, deal with it, either take a pill or don't. So I just felt like, okay, this is my life, and I guess I just have to deal with it. As I got older and my symptoms became more and more debilitating, I started to notice the correlation between how severe my PMDD was and triggers. So now I'm going to kind of like segue just a little bit over to the CPTSD part. So I have complex PTSD, and what this means is that my nervous system developed in an unsafe environment with unpredictable parents. And basically, I was always either in a freeze response or some form of hypervigilance, fight or flight. There was very few moments when I actually felt safe, secure, grounded. So what this has done is that my nervous system is incredibly sensitive, and before I knew what it was, I would just start having these somatic symptoms kind of come into my body, these feelings, without any cognitive thing attached to them. So I was having emotional flashbacks without the memory attached to them. It's like all of a sudden my body would start to kind of freak out, and I wouldn't understand why. Like I wouldn't understand why my somatic response to something felt so overwhelming and kind of uncalled for given these stimuli. So when I started to really become aware of my trauma and the fact that it was really taking over my life, that I was becoming more and more difficult to just do the things that I needed to do and move through my life with ease and grace, I went to therapy and I started doing a lot of trauma work. And as I was along this journey doing trauma work while also having PMDD, I really started to become aware of just how much trauma was connected to my PMDD symptoms. Now, I'm going to give a very clear caveat. This is me talking about my experience in case someone out there has a similar experience. I am not saying that trauma causes PMDD, and I am not saying that everyone who has PMDD is also experiencing a trauma response. This is me just zooming into what it was like for me and joining folks out there who have a similar experience so that we don't feel alone. So if this doesn't resonate with you, don't worry about it. But if it does, I'm super sorry. And also, hey, it's nice to meet you and share in this experience with you. So I say that because I had both of these experiences at the same time, when I started to move into deep trauma work, my PMDD got way worse. And it felt like the deeper I went into the trauma work of unpacking what happened to me, of letting my body do what it needed to do in order to move through and process those terrifying experiences. The week before my period, my hell week, was awful. And sometimes it felt like it became 2 to 3 weeks. Like there was a moment in my healing journey where I felt like I was perpetually in a PMDD episode. And that was really difficult. That was really challenging to be with. And so it was frankly out of this experience of, I feel like I'm gonna die, like I feel like I am getting smashed and crushed by this part of my journey, that I became desperate. And metaphorically and literally, I kind of gave it up to God in a way. And so I started looking for anything that could help me. And my journey brought me to spirituality. It reconnected me to my magical practice, ritual, witchcraft. And by moving into a more ritualistic practice with myself and with my healing journey, I started to experience my own sovereignty. I started to be able to have a sense of control within an uncontrollable experience. If you're interested in this, you can kind of go back into some of my other episodes where I kind of talk more in depth. But now I kind of want to focus on what I'm starting to notice as I sit with other people who have PMDD. And what I'm starting to notice kind of become a part of this intricate weave of this experience. I'm noticing, and I give it up to my own biases because this is my experience, so my body can probably really attune to this really well. But I am noticing, and I cannot help but notice, just how much trauma is correlated to PMDD, and that often the folks that resonate with me and find their way to sharing space with me, there is often this trauma piece associated with PMDD. Now, I'll just also say, having PMDD is traumatic in and of itself, but I'm really noticing what sort of makes it intense, what sort of makes it take hold and become all-consuming one month and maybe not as bad another month. So I'll use myself as an example. As I was saying before, when I was really in the thick of trauma work with my therapist, and when I was really unpacking and healing my trauma, my PMDD symptoms got really bad. They got really intense. They were debilitating. And there was a moment in my life where I felt like my day-to-day experience was just trying to hold on and still be here. As I moved deeper into trauma work, I started to have a different perspective. So rather than this concept of this is out of my control, I can't help that this is happening, and feeling really angry too, like why the hell do I have to deal with this? That I started to shift my mindset to finding where I did have control, finding where I did have agency. And that was in a place of how do I hold this? So rather than being pissed and irritated and defeated every time my PMDD hit, I started to shift my brain to going, okay, what have I been avoiding this entire month that now my body is saying, you have to face it. You have to feel these feelings. We're not going to let you run away from them anymore. And when I moved into that practice, I started to uncouple the story from the sensations of my PMDD. So what I mean is that the more practiced I became within my somatic experience, the more I incorporated my spiritual practices within my healing journey, I was able to notice that I could distinguish between the bodily physical sensations of an emotion, between my brain making up a reason or the story for having that sensation. So this was a long and arduous process where I constantly had to catch my brain from telling me awful, awful stories because I was having a physical experience that felt bad. So for me, often I start to feel in my body this unrelenting pressure and weight mixed with this sensation of heartburn, pressure. I feel like my whole body starts to vibrate. I can't focus. I feel scattered and fragmented. And when my somatic experience is that, it's very easy for my brain to start to make story to that around I'm lazy. There's something that I forgot to do. And because I can't do it now, everything's going to blow up. Catastrophizing thoughts. I start to shame myself. I start to become so critical of who I am. And I attack myself. My brain starts to attack myself for feeling bad. That, in my experience of PMDD, was the worst part. It was the self-attack that I would do. And so when I noticed, okay, that is my most difficult part of this experience, how can I start to create space? How can I just at that part of it maybe experience some control? And so I brought in a very warrior type mindfulness practice when my PMDD would hit, where I would quite literally have this experience, start noticing my brain attack myself, and I would stop it, and I would to myself say, no, that's not true. No, I know that's not true. This is just the PMDD. This is just my body having this experience. And within that experience, the more that I was able to become aware, the more that I was able to notice the tone of the story that I was telling myself, the more I started to notice how the tone that I was telling myself sounded very similar to the trauma that I had experienced in my childhood. So, for example, how I was shaming myself within my PMDD episode was the same way that my parents had shamed me when I was a kid. And when I noticed that, it gave me a sense of hope, because I was like, oh, if I am aware of this, maybe I can actually do something about it. So then I started to break apart myself. I started to really look at myself and how I had been shaped. And I started asking my question, how do I want to be? Do I want to stay the same way, or do I want to change? And for me, the answer was, I am desperate to change. I'm willing to be as uncomfortable and be in pain if it means that it will be different. And so I did. And for me, that process was coming on the front line between myself and my PMDD symptoms and my trauma, and being like, no. Like, yeah, I can't help it that I have a trauma response to some things. And yeah, I can't help that my body has PMDD, but you know what I can help? I can control the way that I talk to myself. I can control whether I am kind to myself or whether I am mean to myself. And even though I am suffering, I have the power to give myself and my body compassion and love. And now, if I was saying this to myself 10 years ago, I would frankly tell myself to fuck off. That's just who I was back then. And I'm making space for that to exist, because I know in a way I'm saying, oh, compassion and love. But in my body, why I would have had that response back then was because it sounded so soft. It sounded so tender. And it was frankly like, that's it? If I embody my younger self, I would be like, what the hell, Elizabeth? You have no idea what it's like inside. And you're telling me to just love myself more? You're telling me to just be compassionate with myself more? Well, fuck you too. That would have been younger me. But what I am aware of now, as I'm older and wiser and having gone through this journey, is that compassion and love is not soft. It is not a passive act. It is akin to being a fighter and being a warrior, because it is so easy to become passive within our own mind's structure. It's easier for me to let the story go. It's easier for me to actually be really cruel to myself. What's much, much harder is for me to catch it and go, all right, I really get we're in suffering right now, and I'm sorry, but I'm not going to make this worse by being critical or judging, and I love you. Even though you are suffering, Elizabeth, in this moment, I am choosing to love you just as you are. Even if you can't pull yourself off of the bed today, I still love you. And I don't think any less of you. Even if you have a moment where you snap at your partner, I still love you. Even if today all you can do is barely function and just get through your day, I still love you. And guess what? It was enough, because I know how hard you're working just to get through the day. That is so much harder for me than saying all the awful things that I could say. So where am I at now? I have experienced a significant decrease in my PMDD symptoms after my trauma therapy. Now, I'm not saying that you, as someone who identifies as having PMDD, if you go and do trauma work, that your PMDD symptoms will decrease. I have no idea. And I don't think anyone can say that because PMDD is such a unique and individualized experience for us. But I'm noticing that that is true within my own body. That the more that I unpacked my material, the less control my PMDD had over me and the less hijacked I felt. So now, as I sit in a place where I am deeply aware of my trauma, I am very aware of what activates me, what triggers me, and I have done a lot of work to build up a lot of resilience around those triggers and how to regulate myself when they happen. I've noticed that my PMDD is not as severe as it was before I ever did therapy. And the reason why I think this is because trauma work, therapy of any kind, what it's really about is you having a deeper relationship with yourself. And when our bodies go through experiences that we hate, it cuts ourselves off from it. You know, if we're in a pain body, it makes sense. We don't want to be with it. But by doing that, we're also cutting ourselves off from a part of ourselves. So by doing therapy, when we become more integrated, more aware of ourselves, where we can offer ourselves that deep compassion, and when we can really embrace our own self-regulation, it makes experiences like this easier to be with. It doesn't mean that they go away. I still have PMDD. Hell, just last month, I totally cried and had a panic attack. But the way I held that panic attack was much different than I had ever beforehand. Instead, I recognized what was going on. Instead, I didn't try to push through it. I just graced myself with laying on the bed and letting my body cry. And as it was happening, there was this distinct moment where I was observing myself going through this process. So I wasn't completely consumed by it going, why the hell is this happening? You know, I knew why it was happening. I'm having this experience because my hormones are shifting and I am hypersensitive to that. And I am in my PMDD window when this is normal for me. This is a part of how my body functions. And I know that in a few moments it will pass and I can move on. And so for me, as I learned how to be with my trauma, I also learned how to be with my PMDD. And so now there are moments when feelings of shame and regret and criticism pop up, but they're not as overwhelming as before because I know how to sit with them. I know how to hold them, and I know how to be with them in my own process and in my own body. And this brings me to how can we liberate ourselves to our own process? How can we find our own empowerment to be like, this is what healing looks like for me. This is what being with this experience looks like for me. This is what actually helps me. And I think we can get really caught up in this idea of what healing and health looks like. You know, most of the time, people are seeking a cure. They just don't want to have it anymore. And I get it. I have been there. But what do you do when there is no cure for what you have? What do you do when this is just probably going to be a part of your experience? Rather than fighting against it and being angry and in resistance to it of like, every month, I hate this. how can you be with it? How can you sit with it in a way that actually starts to give you the feeling of control, that starts to give you the feeling of improvement, that starts to make you feel better? And I think feeling better is really underrated. I mean, everybody, there's often this like, I just want to feel better, and it's like, yeah, I get that. Yeah. Been there. Often that's how I feel too. But rather than I want to feel better, what if we shifted that to how can I be with this better? Because just in that alone, just when I make that subtle shift, I start to feel more empowered. And I think when we start to feel into our own power, our own ability to grab the reins of our experience and be like, I am choosing this now and I am choosing something different, that starts to have this cascading effect on our whole body and our whole nervous system for the better. Again, I don't know if this is your experience, but one thing that I am certain of is that even in the moments where you cannot feel it, even in the moments where your mind just cannot believe it to be true, that I know that hope is always there. So if you're listening to this and you're in your hell week and you're having a hell of a hard time, just know that I really get it. I have been there and I will be there again. And maybe just simply hearing how someone sits with their PMDD has been a comfort, because often we do this alone, and that in of itself is so painful. So whether you're in your hell week and you're pushing through, or whether you're just laying in bed, just doing the best you can, I think you're doing great because you're still here. So if this resonated with you or you're curious about it, I would encourage you to just look inside your own experience. And if you find some similarity or some resonance, my whole perspective is that it doesn't hurt to try something new. So if you feel called, I would encourage you to go out there and maybe find a therapist who can really take the time to attune to your experience and offer you the tools and the safe container and space for you to really cultivate this deeper relationship with yourself. And that will probably look very different than my journey, and that's okay. Because that's one of the great things about being human, is that though we can share in a similar feeling, we are innately unique. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. And thank you for listening to my story. I know today was a bit more about my experience, but I really appreciate your time. And I really appreciate you stopping by and listening and sharing space with me. Until next time, take care.